Do not be alarmed. The emergency tones and sirens you are about to hear are not real. Hey there, I'm Holly, the host of this weekly podcast about disasters and catastrophes. Welcome to episode 2 of All Available Units Respond. Last week, I brought you the tragic story of the Big Bayou Canot rail accident. Please go back and listen to episode 1 if you haven't yet. I also want you to check out my other podcast, Tell Me a True Crime Story. It's a weekly podcast too, and so far it has 7 episodes. I thank you so much for being here and spending some of your day with me. I truly appreciate you. I hope that you and your family are happy, healthy, and safe. Big hugs to all of you. For the recounting of this disaster, I relied heavily on the report of the technical investigation of the Station Nightclub fire. This report was developed by NIST, which stands for the National Institute of Standards and Technology. According to their website, quote, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, was founded in 1901 and is now part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. NIST is one of the nation's oldest physical science laboratories, end quote. The Station Nightclub, located at 211 Cohasset Avenue in West Warwick, Rhode Island, was built around 1950. Through the years, it had changed ownership several times and had previously been a nightclub, a pub, and a restaurant. In 1972, the building was being used as a nightclub named Julio's. In March of 1972, a fire damaged the interior of the building, but the building structure remained. Since the contents of the building sustained fire and smoke damage, interior partitions and paneling were replaced. Although some of the structural framing was charred and smoke-stained, it was reported that it remained in the building continuously until the Station Nightclub fire on February 20th, 2003. Thankfully, no one was in the club at the time of the fire in 1972. The Station Nightclub building was a single-story wood frame building about 4,484 square feet with a flat roof. It had a small basement under the main bar room that was 1,794 square feet. The nightclub was not equipped with a fire sprinkler system. Inside the club, there were 12-foot ceilings. Facing the Station Nightclub from the outside, there were windows on the left-hand side, which were in the main bar area. There were also windows on the right-hand side in the sunroom. There was a ramp and stairs leading from double doors at the main entrance in the front of the building. On the sides of the building, there were stairways leading from 3 side exits. 2 exits were on the left side of the building, and 1 exit was on the right side of the building. The exits on the left-hand side of the building came from the main bar room and the kitchen. However, the kitchen exit was not really considered an accessible exit to patrons. The exit on the right-hand side of the building was near the stage area where the band performed. Entering the club through the main entrance double doors in the front of the building would have brought you into a short entrance hall. At the end of that short hall was a single door that opened up into the ticket taker area. Right beyond that, It opened up into the main assembly area that contained a dining room, the sunroom, the dance floor, and the raised platform that was used as a stage. Behind the stage was the drummer's alcove. If you're unsure what an alcove is, it's a recess in the wall. This just means that this part of the wall is built further back than the rest of the wall. Think of a bay window that juts out, the kind that some people use for reading nooks. It's similar to that. So those areas that we just talked about, the dining area, the sunroom, the dance floor and stage, would be to the front and right of you if you just entered through the front entrance. On your left-hand side would have been the main bar room. Further beyond the bar room, walking toward the back of the building, on your left, you would have come to the kitchen first and then the dart room. In the back of the building were the office area and the bathrooms. The office area would have been to the left rear of the building, beyond the dart room, and the bathrooms were in the back center of the building, straight ahead from the main entrance door. At 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thursday, February 20th, 2003, fans gathered on the dance floor around the small platform used as a stage. Others looked on from the sunroom area. Just after 11 p.m., the lights were dimmed. The band was about to take the stage. The rock band best known for their 1989 Billboard hit, Once Bitten, Twice Shy, Great White, began performing at about 11:07 p.m., opening up with their 1991 song, Desert Moon. Their tour manager, Daniel Beakley, set off 4 pyrotechnic displays called gerbs, or sometimes referred to as fountains. The ones they used that night were called 15 by 15. They emit sparks for 15 seconds, shooting them 15 feet into the air. Remember earlier I mentioned that the club had 12-foot ceilings inside? 2 of the gerbs spewed sparks straight up near the center line of the alcove opening. The other 2 were pointed at a 45-degree angle to the left and right sides of the drummer's alcove. It's still unclear to this day whether or not the band was given permission to set off the pyrotechnic special effects inside of the nightclub. The owners of the club, brothers Jeffrey and Michael Derderian, maintain that the band neither asked for permission nor was ever granted permission to set off pyrotechnics during the concert. The brothers also said there was no mention of pyrotechnics in the band's performance contract. However, the band said that they did receive permission from the club's owners. 8 seconds after ignition of the pyrotechnics, sparks from the angled gerbs reached the upper left wall by the drummer's alcove. Those hot particulates ignited the foam insulation. The foam insulation that ignited had been placed in the walls and the ceiling around the band area to help dampen the noise. The type of foam insulation used was highly flammable. A CBS News article online reported that according to former Attorney General Patrick Lynch, who investigated this tragedy, the foam insulation installed, quote, was equal to gallons of gasoline. It was liquid fire, end quote. According to 2003 models, the year that this tragedy occurred, the occupant limit for that building would have been about 420 persons. Approximately 440 people and possibly up to 458 people were inside the Station Nightclub that night. Investigators know from video taken that night that the first flames started just seconds into Great White's opening song. 11 seconds after ignition, the band noticed the flames. People in the crowd noticed the flames too, and began to realize that they were not an intentional part of the show. 25 seconds after the first flames appeared on the upper left wall, flames were touching the ceiling on both sides of the platform stage. The band stopped playing 30 seconds after the fire began. According to the NIST report, quote, "The fire spread very quickly across the polyurethane foam," end quote. The fire soared across the walls and ceiling. Most of the crowd began to evacuate. 41 seconds after ignition, the fire alarm began to sound and the emergency strobe lights started to flash. According to a surviving witness, Linda Saran, inside the club that night, quote, "The foam was raining down and the flames are dripping from the ceiling. It looked like it was raining black fire," end quote. She also said, quote, "The bar got quiet because people were dying, literally, and all you could hear was the roar of the fire and liquor bottles exploding," end quote. Linda and her friend Deb knew they were quickly running out of time to get out. They went to a window and kicked at it, but it wouldn't break. An off-duty police officer that had been outside the window had heard the kicking at the window. He went to get a tire iron from his car, busted the glass, and started pulling people outside through the broken window. When Linda finally made it outside, she realized she was burned badly. Her hands wouldn't work. Then she noticed the black on her arms. She described her burned arms like this, quote, "It looked like a ladder of those black jelly bracelets from the 80s hanging in rings around my wrist," end quote. Another survivor of the fire, Phil Barr, was between the stage and the front door, crouching down behind some people in front of him. He said, quote, "You could not see your hand in front of your face. That's how thick the smoke was. Once you could no longer see, it was total pandemonium," end quote. People were trying to push to the front door. Phil had gotten to the club early in the evening that night, well before the club became crowded. Therefore, he'd had time to wander around and get acclimated to the layout of the club. He said, quote, "It became really clear that we were not going to be able to get out the front door," end quote. He knew there was another exit in the main bar room. It was further, but it was a straight shot to get to it. He went around the crowd of people trying to get to the front exit and into the main bar room. He was getting pushed from behind, and he tripped over what he'd assumed was a bar stool. He fell flat on his face. He explained that it became very difficult to breathe. He passed out. He could no longer hear alarms, noise, or screaming. He said when he came to, he felt burning on his face and excruciating pain near the base of his spine. He felt a weight on top of him. He said he was pretty certain he'd crawled out from under another person in order to get up. He ran across the room and ran face first into the wall. He ended up feeling the door and rammed his shoulder into it. He fell out of the exit door and down the stairs. He could barely breathe. His chest felt tight and constricted, and his throat was bleeding. Phil Barr was placed in a medically induced coma for 3 weeks. When he awoke, he was told that his lungs had been badly damaged. He spent 1 month in the hospital, fighting to breathe on his own, and had to learn to walk again. At 50 seconds after ignition of the fire, the ceiling above the alcove was fully involved in fire. At 11:09 p.m., less than 1 minute after the fire started, 911 received 3 cell phone calls from people on scene at the station. The information was immediately relayed to the West Warwick Fire Department, who assigned and dispatched Engine 4, Engine 1, Engine 2, Ladder 1, Rescue 1, and Battalion Chief 1 to the fire scene. At 1 minute after ignition, thick, black smoke came out of the sunroom windows. The smoke appeared to be at floor level inside these windows at this time. Occupants were escaping out of these windows. At 60 seconds after ignition, flashover occurred. According to the U.S. Fire Administration, quote, flashover is a thermally driven event during which every combustible surface exposed to thermal radiation in a compartment or enclosed space rapidly and simultaneously ignites, end quote. At 90 seconds from ignition, visibility in the club is lost due to heavy smoke filling. People were piled up in the front entrance, jamming the doorway. Survivors who'd escaped were trying to rescue people who were wedged in the front doorway. Smoke poured out over the top of the pile of trapped people. At about 4 minutes and 38 seconds after ignition, flames were near the door and smoke was less than 1 foot above the floor inside. At 5 minutes and 12 seconds after ignition, the first observation was made of flames out of the front of the building. At 11:13 p.m., 5 minutes and 21 seconds after ignition, Engine 4 of the West Warwick Fire Department arrived on scene and reported heavy fire. They immediately commenced running the first hose line. At 5 minutes and 34 seconds from ignition, flames were extending from the front exit approximately 8 to 9 feet. At 5 minutes and 43 seconds from ignition, flames were extending from the front windows. At 6 minutes from ignition, firefighters from Engine 4 directed their hose line to the main entrance. More firefighters arrived on scene on Ladder 1, Engine 2, and Engine 3. The Warwick Task Force was activated by Battalion 1, which put into effect a mutual aid agreement and dispatched 7 additional engine or ladder companies from surrounding communities. Battalion 1 also requested 12 ambulance units. By 11:22 p.m., the West Warwick Fire Chief was en route to the scene. He asked fire dispatch to contact Metro Fire Control and implement the mass casualty plan. A triage area was set up in the parking lot and inside of the Cohasset Inn by Engine 3's officer. The Cohasset Inn is a restaurant. It's catty-cornered across the street, about 230 feet away from the nightclub. By 11:28 p.m., 20 minutes after ignition, at least 3 hose lines were streaming water to the front door area. At 11:32 p.m., the roof area over the main bar appeared to be down. At 11:33 p.m., the fire chief asked fire dispatch to contact the state fire marshal's office and request a state fire marshal be sent to the scene as soon as possible. The fire dispatcher notified the on-scene triage that Kent County Hospital was overwhelmed and that additional victims should be transported to Rhode Island Trauma Center. Triage responded to fire dispatch that the ambulance units were using their own discretion as to which hospital the victims were being transported to. At 11:57 p.m., after a partial collapse of the main roof section, the fire chief ordered an accountability roll call check for all firefighters on the fire ground. At about 11:58 p.m., fire dispatch advised command that Kent County Hospital was at maximum capacity. Also at 11:58 p.m., 50 minutes into the fire, Warwick Ladder Unit began applying a master stream to the fire. At approximately 12:15 a.m., the sunroom area began to collapse, immediately followed by another accountability roll call check. The state fire marshal arrived on scene sometime between 12:15 a.m. and 1 o'clock a.m. At 12:37 a.m., command asked fire dispatch to notify the chaplain and to cancel all additional units and the life flight helicopter. Triage advised fire dispatch that all patients had been transported. Since most of the deaths at the Station Nightclub happened during the evacuation process, A major focus of the NIST investigation was on the egress or exiting event. That night, concert goers had entered the club through the main entrance door, so when the fire started, they naturally tried to retreat through that same door. However, at approximately 1 minute and 30 seconds after the start of the fire, the main exit was blocked by the crowd crush. The double doors to the outside were open, but in the panic to get out, people tripped or were pushed down and trampled upon. There were people stacked on top of one another, mostly in the prone or face-down position. The pile of people stacked on top of one another was several feet tall, and thick, black smoke was billowing out over their heads. There were 31 victims recovered from the main front entrance area and front entrance hallway. According to the NIST investigation, it depended on a combination of two major factors, whether or not occupants who chose to exit through the front main exit were able to successfully escape or not. These factors were, number one, when the occupant decided to begin to evacuate, and number two, where the occupant was located when he or she decided to evacuate. The NIST report stated, quote, "Clearly, the time to commence evacuation and the initial location at the beginning of one's evacuation effort both contribute to the outcome." End quote. 9 victims were recovered just beyond the end of the entrance hallway and the ticket taker area, where it opens up into the main assembly room. 1 victim lay dead on the dance floor. Not too many people knew that there was an exit to the outside in the kitchen, mostly just the club employees. It was reported that about 12 people fled outside to safety via the kitchen exit door. 1 person was found dead in the kitchen. Those who discovered the main entrance blocked looked for other means of escape. In the confusion and rapidly decreasing visibility due to the opaque smoke, some fled blindly or became disoriented and found themselves trapped in places with no means of escape, such as bathrooms, the office, the dart room, and the storage area. 26 people were found deceased in these areas. Some of the patrons were aware of the exit door in the main bar room because they were familiar with the club's layout. Others discovered this exit after realizing that the front main entrance had become impassable. Although some occupants later reported having difficulty in opening the main barroom exit door, it was later discovered that about 46 occupants successfully used that exit door to escape. 3 victims were found dead in the main bar area, just inside the windows. A small number of people, mostly band members or those associated with the band, used the exit door near the platform stage. Those who used that door did so very early on in the fire, because this exit quickly became impassable. Smoke and flames blocked this exit within about 1 minute and 25 seconds of the start of the fire. At 4.5 minutes after the start of the fire, dense smoke and flames could be seen down to the floor level just inside of this exit. About 79 people exited the nightclub through windows, 54 through the windows by the main bar, and 25 through the windows in the sunroom. Most of them were assisted by people and first responders on the outside of the building. 18 people were found dead inside the sunroom near the windows. 7 victims lost their lives right outside of the sunroom windows on the outside of the building. It's unclear if they died as they escaped or if they were pulled from the sunroom by rescuers. 96 people died on February 20th, 2003 at the Station Nightclub. 4 others died later on as a result of their injuries, making the total loss of life from the fire 100 people. 230 people were injured. The only band member to die in the fire that night was the guitarist, 31-year-old Ty Longley. Witnesses reported that he initially made it out of the building safely, but went back in to retrieve his guitar and ended up consuming toxic fumes. 9 months after the fire, the band's tour manager, Daniel Beakley, and the club's owners, brothers Jeff Derderian and Michael Derderian, were each charged with 200 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 100 for criminal negligence and 100 for misdemeanor manslaughter. Daniel Beakley, the tour manager, failed to get a license for the pyrotechnics from the state of Rhode Island and permits from the local fire department. Beakley pleaded guilty to 100 counts of involuntary manslaughter. He accepted a plea deal and served less than half of a 4-year sentence in prison. Michael Derderian had been responsible for the day-to-day activities involved with running the club, and he'd purchased the highly flammable foam insulation. 3 months before the fire, Jeff and Michael Derderian were given a citation by the fire marshal for having a secondary interior door by the stage that opened inward against the path of egress. They were told to take down this door, but on February 20th, the night of the fire, the door was still up. It was also covered with the highly flammable insulation foam. The brothers pleaded no contest to the charges against them and ended up accepting plea deals. Jeff Derderian was given 3 years probation and 500 hours of community service. Michael Derderian was given a harsher sentence since he was the one who purchased the foam insulation. He spent less than 3 years behind bars. Based on simulations conducted by NIST and computer predictions, many of the occupants had less than 90 seconds after the fire started to exit the building. The NIST report explains, quote, "The quickly spreading fire and rapid production of smoke led to high temperatures and low oxygen levels throughout most of the simulated nightclub. The exceptions were a few areas near the open windows of the main bar room and the open doorway to the main entry foyer. In these areas, air from outside the structure was being drawn in, providing a more tenable environment and more time for escape," end quote. In a NIST simulation of the whole nightclub fully equipped with fire sprinklers, it showed that the fire was completely extinguished in just under 2 minutes from ignition. According to the report of the technical investigation of the Station Nightclub fire conducted by NIST, quote, "The direct contributors to this large loss of life were found to be 1. The hazardous mix of building contents, 2. The inadequate capability to suppress the fire during its early stage of growth, and 3. The inability of the exits to handle all of the occupants in the short time available for such a fast-growing fire," end quote. The Station Fire Memorial Foundation was founded by family members and friends of those who perished in the fire on Thursday, February 20th, 2003. Their mission, as stated on their website, is, quote, "to ensure that our loved ones would receive a proper memorial upon the sacred ground where their lives were so tragically cut short," end quote. A memorial has been erected where the Station Nightclub once stood. The 1-acre park opened up in May of 2017. It includes individual granite monuments with the names and birth dates of every victim of the fire. There is also a courtyard, memorial gardens, and a commemorative walkway paved with thousands of commemorative bricks with inscriptions on them, purchased by loved ones of the victims. Thank you so much for being here and listening to my new podcast, All Available Units Respond. I really and truly appreciate it. I also have another podcast I want you to check out. It's called Tell Me a True Crime Story. Please subscribe to both of these podcasts so you won't miss any episodes. And tune in next week right here for episode 3 of All Available Units Respond. Hugs to all of you. Bye-bye.